My parents said, "You're on your own financially." Then bought my sister a condo, 2 bedrooms, granite counters, a bow on the door. I didn't cry. I packed. I vanished to another state. 4 years later, my thesis exploded online. Nature, Science Times, morning shows wanted the girl from the lab. They found out on Facebook. Like strangers. Like everyone else. I'm Anita. The quiet one they called responsible. The one who ate ramen while they financed Emma's Lakeview. I changed my name. Changed my address. Changed the ending I was handed. If favoritism built a fire in you, you're not alone. They bought a condo. I built a cure. Growing up, I learned early what love looked like in our house. It had a favorite color. It wore sequins. It had Emma's name stitched across every trophy shelf. When she wanted dance lessons, the money appeared overnight. When I needed a scientific calculator for calculus, Mom said, "Use the old one, don't be dramatic." Emma got praise for trying. I got silence for succeeding. By 16, she had a car with a ribbon. I had a ride to the library. I told myself I didn't mind. I was the smart one. Smart girls endure quietly. Senior year, I tried to ask for help with college costs. Dad was in his recliner, paper folded just enough to glare at me. Mom folded laundry without looking up. The TV hummed behind us, a cooking show making more noise than our family ever did. "I'll need help with room and board," I said. Dad didn't blink. "You got scholarships," he said. "You're 18. You're on your own financially." 6 words, each one colder than the last. I nodded. Pretended independence was a choice. That night, I filled out loan forms under my desk lamp, calculating hours and debt like a punishment I'd earned. Every Sunday call after that became smaller, their voices fading under the sound of football and laughter about Emma. I learned how to stop needing what wasn't offered, to turn disappointment into fuel. If you've ever been the reliable one left behind, you know that silence can scar deeper than cruelty. Home stopped being home. It became a ledger. And that night, while Emma slept soundly next door, I made myself a quiet promise. Someday, they'd learn what silence can build. The lab opened at 7. I was there by 6. Silence, centrifuges, the smell of ethanol and hope. Saturday morning, my phone buzzed. Family group chat. Emma's selfies with a condo ribbon bigger than her smile. 2 bedrooms, granite counters, Lakeview. "Happy 21st, baby girl." I stared until the screen dimmed. No one asked where I was. No one noticed I hadn't replied. I set the phone face down and recorded dissolution data like nothing had happened. Something ended quietly that morning. Not love. Expectation. I stopped auditioning for a part I'd never win. I poured myself into polymers and problem sets, into the peace that beeps and graphs can give. Dr. Martinez noticed. "You're different," she said. "More focused, less apologetic." I ran out of apologies, I said. We met in her office, walls crowded with maps of futures. "I want PhD programs far from home," I told her. "Full funding, real work." She smiled. "I know exactly where to send you." I applied that week. Stanford replied in 1 month. Full fellowship, health insurance, stipend generous enough to breathe. I didn't tell my family. Meanwhile, I made 3 decisions. First, document everything. Notebooks, backups, timestamps, witnesses. If my work mattered, provenance would matter more. Second, change my legal name, Anita Martinez, to honor the mentor who opened the door. Third, move in silence. Finish undergrad, graduate, leave. Senior spring, I skipped the family photo ops. I crossed a small stage, heard my name, and felt seen without an audience. Kevin and Lisa cheered. Dr. Martinez cried into my hair. 2 weeks later, I packed the Honda. Ramen, notebooks, plants I wasn't sure would survive. I drove west until the sky turned Pacific. Text to my parents, already over the border. "Starting a PhD, new number, I'll be busy." Polite, clean, closed. Stanford was a different gravity. People here chased questions the way others chase praise. I belonged to the midnight shift. Pipettes, playlists, and the long patience of discovery. I learned to be alone without being lonely, to replace noise with focus, to measure progress in microns, not approval. Once Mom called during a synthesis. I watched the screen blink, counted to 10, and let it pass into voicemail. The polymer behaved better than my heart. I wasn't disappearing. I was refining. And somewhere between one breakthrough and another, I realized independence wasn't isolation. It was freedom with structure, peace with purpose, and the first real sound of my own voice. By winter, my work had a spine. By spring, it had a voice. And for the first time in my life, so did I. I didn't vanish. I evolved. The night of the acquisition felt like the final page of a long chapter. Champagne, laughter, the hum of achievement. Our company had just been valued at 80 million. Ryan gave a toast. Professor Kim smiled from across the room. For once, success didn't feel like survival. It felt earned. It felt mine. Then I saw her. Sandra, hair perfectly styled, dressed too expensive for her stories of struggle. My mother, uninvited. She glided through the crowd like she belonged there. "There's my brilliant daughter," she announced, loud enough to cut music. Guests turned, clapped politely. I smiled through clenched teeth. "Can we talk privately?" I asked, guiding her into my office. Door closed. Silence sharp enough to sting. "You didn't think to invite your own mother?" she said, eyes scanning my desk, my nameplate. "I had to hear about your big success from Facebook." "I was going to call tomorrow," I lied. She smiled, thin, practiced. "I've been thinking about everything I've done for you." The tone was familiar, rehearsed. "When your father left, I sacrificed everything. Now you've made it, and it's only fair that you repay what you owe." "Repay?" She reached into her purse and unfolded a sheet of paper. Typed, itemized, absurd. Private school, food, emotional labor. At the bottom, $1,000. "Give me $1 million for raising you," she said. Calm, cold, like an invoice. I couldn't speak. Every manipulation, every guilt trip, every "after all I've done," screamed between us. "Mom, that's not how family works." "Family?" she snapped. "Family doesn't abandon the one who gave them everything." "You chose to have me," I said softly. "Children don't owe their parents for being born." Her face hardened. "Can't or won't." Her voice trembled with anger. "I could have had a life, a career, a husband. But instead, I gave all of it to you." "There is no debt," I said. "I'll help with expenses like before, but not this." Her tone dropped to a whisper. "Then you're no longer my daughter." She stood. "Don't call, don't visit, unless you reconsider your selfish decision." At the door, she turned one last time. "Your father would be ashamed of what you've become." Then she was gone. The silence that followed was alive. It filled the corners, pressed against my ribs, echoed with everything I'd never said. I sat there breathing through the collapse, realizing the person I'd been, the daughter, the pleaser, had just died quietly in that chair. Outside, laughter returned, glasses clinked, but inside my office, something sacred broke, and something new was born. Freedom, ugly, aching, irreversible freedom. She demanded payment. I paid in silence. The celebration blurred after she left. I heard the laughter, the glasses clinking, the echo of success trying to fill the silence she'd carved. Everyone thought I was fine. I smiled for photos, shook hands, said all the right words. Inside, I was unraveling, neatly, professionally, invisibly. That night, I sat on the bathroom floor of my office, still in my champagne-stained dress, hands trembling so hard I could barely breathe. $1 million for motherhood. It wasn't a demand. It was a price tag on love. By morning, the story inside me changed. I wasn't the broken daughter anymore. I was the survivor of emotional debt collection. 2 days later, I told my therapist everything. Dr. Martinez listened quietly, then said, "You're mourning the mother you deserved, not the one you had." Her words hit harder than my mother's threats ever did. I made a list that night. Things I was no longer responsible for. Her feelings, her finances, her version of history. Then another list. Things I was responsible for. My peace, my company, my boundaries. Sandra didn't go quietly. Within a week, my phone filled with messages. Angry, pleading, performative. "You'll regret this, Danielle." Then, "I forgive you." Then, "The media should know who you really are." The manipulation came in waves, each one smaller, weaker, until they broke against the wall I finally built. I stopped answering calls, blocked numbers, forwarded everything through my lawyer. I wasn't running anymore. I was protecting the life I'd fought to build. Dr. Martinez helped me draft a trust. Enough for my mother's basic needs. Nothing more, nothing less. Controlled, documented, untouchable. It was compassion with boundaries, a foreign language I was finally fluent in. The news eventually spread. Old friends called, pretending concern while fishing for gossip. She demanded what? I told them the truth, calmly. She wanted a refund on raising me. Some laughed, some gasped, but I didn't flinch. For the first time, I could tell my story without shaking. Michael found me one night staring at my phone. Dozens of unread voicemails from her. He didn't ask what they said. He just took the phone, set it face down on the table, and said, "You don't owe her peace. You already earned it." He was right. I didn't owe her silence, or explanations, or my sanity. By spring, the noise had faded. The company thrived. The trust ran quietly in the background, and I started to sleep through the night again. Freedom, I learned, doesn't arrive with fireworks. It comes quietly, on the nights you don't dream of apologies. She taught me control. I just learned to use it differently. 8 years passed in what felt like both a blink and a lifetime. The company grew, the noise quieted, and somewhere between deadlines and dawns, I learned what peace actually sounds like. It's not silence. It's the absence of panic. It's the steady rhythm of a life that no longer revolves around survival. One autumn morning, I returned to Seattle for a conference. I hadn't been back since I'd left everything behind. Driving past my old street, I felt nothing. No ache, no anger, just distance measured in peace. Then, outside a coffee shop downtown, I saw a woman sitting on the curb with a paper cup. Tangled gray hair, eyes I used to flinch from. Sandra. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The world went quiet again. The kind of quiet that used to mean danger. Now it meant choice. I bought 2 coffees, sat beside her. She didn't recognize me at first. Then she whispered my name like a question. We talked for an hour. Half-truths, fragments, memories too fragile to touch. She was sick. Pride had taken everything the world hadn't. I arranged help through the trust. Not as a daughter repaying debt, but as a human being refusing cruelty. I didn't forgive her that day, but I stopped letting her story define mine. Peace didn't come from reconciliation. It came from compassion with boundaries, from knowing I could help without surrendering myself again. Family isn't who shares your blood. It's who shares your healing. She gave me fear. I turned it into freedom. If you've ever had to love someone from a distance, peace isn't paid for. It's earned, one boundary at a time. Have you ever had to set boundaries with someone you love? Tell me your story in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear it. And if this journey spoke to you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of healing, strength, and becoming whole again.
I didn't expect a parade. Didn't expect balloons or banners or even a warm casserole in the oven. After years in the Army, I had learned to temper expectations. But still, I thought there might be a porch light on, a voice from the door, a mother's whisper, a father's nod. Instead, what I got was a text. Don't bother coming this Christmas. We decided it's best you stay away this year. That was it. No greeting, no punctuation, no explanation. Just words that felt like a shut door to a house I used to dream of coming back to. My name is Evelyn Blake, Sergeant First Class, retired, 32 years old. And that night, I sat alone in a one-bedroom apartment 2 states away beneath blinking Christmas lights. I strung myself. I had a glass of red wine in my hand, a plane ticket in my inbox, and a heart I wasn't sure was beating. There was no follow-up message, no sorry, no love, Dad. I replied with one word, fine. Not the kind of fine that hopes someone will ask again. Not the kind that begs between the lines. No, it was the final kind of fine. The kind you send when you've just realized you were never invited to the table. You were only ever allowed to sit quietly beside it. I closed the laptop, deleted the flight confirmation, raised my glass to the empty room, to family. 5 days later, I turned my phone back on. 10 missed calls, 1 from my brother, 4 from my mother, and 1 from a name I hadn't seen in years, Harold Wells, attorney at law. That's when I knew they didn't understand what fine meant. They were still playing the old game, but this time I wasn't the same daughter who left, and they were about to learn what happens when the quiet one stops asking to come home. I was 18 when I enlisted, not because I dreamed of glory, not because I was brave. I joined the Army because I needed a reason to exist, because home didn't feel like home. Not with the way my father, Gerald Blake, looked at me like I was a math error he had to carry for the rest of his life. At my graduation, he didn't hug me, didn't even shake my hand. He said, "Try not to embarrass yourself out there." That was his version of love criticism, sharpened like a hunting knife always pointed just shy of the heart. My mother Linda stood beside him with her hands clasped tight, whispering to no one in particular, "Don't provoke him. Just let it be a good day." She used to be softer, but years of being married to Gerald turned her voice into a habit of hiding. She walked on eggshells so long she forgot how to stand flat on her feet. And then there was Jason, my younger brother. Dad's shadow. Learned early that silence kept the peace, and siding with him meant fewer slammed doors. So I left. But I didn't disconnect. Even from across oceans and sandstorms, I called on birthdays, sent flowers on their anniversary. When Mom mentioned the roof was leaking, I mailed a check. When Jason's car broke down, I wired him money without asking why. They never asked how I managed it, never asked what it cost me physically, mentally. They just cashed it. Sometimes replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Sometimes nothing at all. Still, every Christmas I hoped. Not for gifts, not even for thanks. I just wanted to walk in and feel like someone had noticed I came back alive. I didn't need parades. I didn't need medals. I just wanted to sit at the table and not feel like an empty chair. But year after year, it was always the same. Dad would ask me to shovel the driveway before I took off my boots. Mom would pretend not to see the tension. Jason would glance up from his phone, maybe nod. That was home. A place where I was tolerated but never welcomed. And still, I kept hoping. That's what broke me the most. Not the rejection, but that even after everything I kept hoping anyway. This year was supposed to be different, my final year in uniform. My papers were signed, my pension modest but enough, my back still aching but no longer bleeding. I wanted to come home, not for closure, not even for forgiveness, just for something quieter than all that. I had imagined it simple me in the kitchen with Mom laughing over half-burnt cookies, Jason telling me about his job, his girlfriend, whatever piece of a life he was building, and Dad, maybe just one sentence. "You did good. I wasn't expecting magic, just presence. A place to sit where I didn't have to prove I belonged." So I booked the ticket in early December. Spent my off hours at base browsing recipes looking up gifts. I bought a small scarf for Mom Green with little silver leaves, Jason's favorite bourbon wrapped in brown paper. For Dad, a framed copy of my last commendation letter. I thought maybe he'd hang it in the hallway, or at least read it. But the message came before any of that. No argument, no build-up. Just a text that detonated all the quiet hope I had been holding in my chest. "Don't bother coming this Christmas. We decided it's best you stay away this year. No, we love you. No, it's complicated. Just that clinical. Final." And it wasn't just Dad. Mom didn't follow up. Jason didn't check in. 3 people who shared my blood, and not one of them reached for me. I sat in my kitchen with the blinking lights I'd strung myself gifts still in their boxes, and realized something I hadn't let myself say out loud before. I wasn't invited. Not just this year, maybe not ever. I typed out a reply, paused, erased the whole thing, typed again. Fine, that was all. Not bitter. Not baiting, just a quiet confirmation that I'd finally stopped asking for a seat at a table that had already been cleared. Then I closed my laptop, canceled the flight, poured a glass of wine, and raised it to the silence, to family. I didn't plan revenge. I didn't even plan a response. I just needed to stop thinking. So I did what soldiers do in quiet moments I organized. I went digging through my old Army email archive. The kind of inbox no one really deletes. Memos, scanned forms, deployment orders, forgotten attachments. That's when I saw it. A digital copy of a mortgage co-signing agreement 5 years old. Flagged as executed. Signed by my father. Signed by me. Stamped. Witnessed. Legal. At first, I didn't think much of it. Dad had asked me to sign something when I was home on leave. Said it was just a technicality. The bank needed a stronger applicant. His credit wasn't ideal. He made it sound small, like helping a friend jumpstart their car. And back then, I was still in my 20s, still desperate for something from him. So I signed, never asked what it meant, never followed up. I didn't even keep the hard copy. But there, it was tucked in that inbox like a whisper from the past. This time I read it slowly, line by line, clause by clause, and in plain legal language one sentence reached out and shook me. In the event of primary borrower default or voluntary transfer, cosigner assumes controlling interest over the property until full loan maturity. Controlling interest. Not partial, not symbolic. Controlling. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. While my father was busy cutting me out, he'd forgotten something. On paper, I wasn't just his daughter. I was his co-owner. No, I was the majority owner. He needed me once, to save face with the bank. And I had shown up, in uniform, no questions asked. But now he was about to find out what happens when the daughter you used starts reading the fine print. I didn't call them. I didn't warn them. I didn't even tell a friend. I simply opened a notebook and started writing, not a letter filled with anger or grief. No confessions, no guilt, just the facts, calm, precise, formal. Effective immediately, I will be exercising my controlling interest as co-signer and legal partial owner of the property located at 12 Windmere Lane. All legal rights and responsibilities will be enacted through counsel. You will be contacted shortly. That was it. No threats. No drama. Just truth they had forgotten. I printed the letter, signed it with my full name and military rank, and mailed it certified old school intentional. Let them open it together. Let them read it around the same kitchen table where they once handed me store-brand gift cards and told me not to talk about war stories because it made Dad uncomfortable. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I booked a cabin in the Smoky Mountains. Quiet, wood-paneled, far from any town big enough to make noise. Christmas came early that year, snow on the roof, a fire in the hearth, no tree, no ornaments, but peace. The kind you earn, not buy. I turned my phone off and left it that way for 5 full days. No buzz, no screens, just the hiss of wind against the cabin windows and the soft creak of time slowing down. When I finally turned it back on, 10 missed calls waited, 1 from Jason, 4 from my mother, 3 unknowns, 1 from a number that froze the back of my neck, Harold Wells, attorney at law. It was almost funny. 5 years ago, they needed me to sign. Now, suddenly, they needed me to forget. But here's the thing, I had spent years letting things slide, letting things go, letting them talk over me, forget me, push me out without having to lift a finger. Not this time. This time, the paper had my name, and they were going to have to say it out loud. The calls kept coming. I didn't answer a single one. Not because I wanted to punish anyone, because I had nothing left to explain. On the 6th day, I finally picked up. It was Jason. His voice came through in a panic, like he was mid-run, like maybe this time he realized I wasn't bluffing. "Evelyn, what the hell is this? Dad's freaking out. There's talk of lawyers. He thinks he's getting evicted." "What are you doing?" I stirred the coffee in my mug and let the question hang in the air before answering. "I'm executing my rights," I said evenly, the same way Dad executed his decision to tell me not to come home. There was a silence on his end, and for a second I thought he might say something that sounded like reflection. But then came the defense. "You're really going to kick them out over a stupid text, no, Jason," I said quietly. "I'm not kicking anyone out yet. That one word 'yet' did all the work for me. I didn't need to yell. I just needed them to sit with that possibility." He stammered something I didn't catch and then said, "You know how Dad is." "Yes, Jason?" I replied, "I know exactly how he is. And that's why I'm doing this. Because people like my father rely on silence. They count on your loyalty, your guilt, your need. They teach you early that asking for love is weakness and then punish you for still needing it. But I didn't need crumbs anymore. I had a contract. And for the first time in my life, I had leverage." The next call was from their lawyer, Harold Wells. He tried to sound composed, but the strain cracked through. "Miss Blake, I believe there may have been some misunderstanding. The letter you sent has caused considerable concern." "There's no misunderstanding," I replied. "The documents are valid. I've reviewed the terms with my counsel. I am invoking control." He paused. I could hear him swallow. Then he pivoted. "Perhaps we could explore options. A buyout, maybe a restructuring of the note." That's when it clicked they weren't just nervous. They were scared because for the first time, Gerald Blake wasn't in control, and the one he'd pushed out of the house now held the keys. After the call with Harold Wells, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't even feel angry. What I felt was something closer to clarity, like I had just wiped fog from a mirror and finally saw the full shape of what had been done to me, not in one moment, but over years. Later that evening, I got a call from Reggie Carter, the property manager I'd worked with back on base. He had done the initial walkthrough at 12 Windmere Lane, just as I'd requested quiet, professional, no drama. "Your folks weren't thrilled to see us," he said, "but we kept it respectful. Just like you asked." I asked him how bad it was expecting a rundown of peeling paint or an aging roof. He exhaled. "Cosmetically, it's fine. Structurally, though, basement leaks mold starting to form under the west-facing windows, and the attic reno is half finished." He hesitated. "But that's not the part you need to hear." I waited. "There are 2 tenants, Evelyn, young college-aged. One's living in Jason's old room. The other's in yours. No lease, no paperwork. Looks like cash deals." I checked the drawers and the entryway receipts for rent in cash handwritten. I didn't speak. My mouth had gone dry. Not from rage, not from surprise, from insult. They hadn't just told me I wasn't welcome. They had turned my legal property into a side hustle, rented out the room I came home to on holiday leave. The room where I used to lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, hoping for the sound of someone knocking just once to say they were glad I made it back alive. I hung up with Reggie, walked to my desk, and opened a new document. This time it wasn't polite. It was a formal 30-day notice of management transition and legal suspension of all rent collection. Sublease agreements were null. All communication would now go through counsel. And at the bottom, I signed my full name. Evelyn Blake. Sergeant First Class U.S. Army Ret, legal co-owner. 12 Windmere Lane. Then I texted Jason 3 words. "Check your mailbox." The voicemails came in fast after that one after another, like a string of firecrackers going off in slow motion. I didn't listen to them, not because I didn't care, but because I already knew how they'd sound. My mother's voice caught between guilt and denial. My brother trying to mediate without picking a side. And my father. If he spoke at all, it would only be to reassert control, not to understand. I let them talk to air. "See, there's a moment every soldier knows. It's not the first shot. It's not the last breath. It's that second when your boots hit solid ground and you realize you survived. Everything after that is quieter, more dangerous. That's what this felt like. I wasn't retaliating. I wasn't even reacting. I was responding with clarity. So I finalized the document and forwarded it to Harold Wells. Effective January 2nd, all legal rights to the property at 12 Windmere Lane would transfer to me as managing owner. 30-day notice. Pending inspection. Possible termination of current residency. All rent payments suspended. Any further communication was to be directed through legal counsel. But I wasn't done. I hired a veteran-run property management company people who knew what it meant to carry weight quietly. They would arrive after the holiday to begin formal transition, not to change locks or toss furniture, just to make it clear the house didn't belong to them anymore, not in practice, not on paper. That night, I sat by the fireplace in the cabin. No stockings, no tree, no music playing from another room. But there was heat, there was stillness, and above all, there was something I hadn't felt in years: control. I didn't need them to fall apart. I didn't need an apology screamed over a voicemail. I only needed them to see what it felt like when someone who never fought back finally used the tools they gave her. The deed, the signature, the silence. I wasn't taking anything away from them. I was just reminding them whose name was on the deed. January 2nd arrived with sharp wind and low gray skies. Snow lined the street in stiff ridges where the plow had passed, and the air carried that heavy silence winter keeps for special days, the kind that feels like something's about to break whether you want it to or not. I didn't come alone. I arrived at 12 Windmere Lane with Reggie, my property manager, a locksmith, and a folder of documents in my hand. I wore a black wool coat, my boots polished, and my army dog tags beneath my collar, not to prove a point, just to remind myself who I had become. My father opened the door, face red, breath sharp, like he'd been pacing the hallway for an hour, waiting to explode. "What the hell is this circus, Evelyn?" he snapped. I didn't answer right away. I stepped past him calm and focused. This wasn't his foyer anymore. This is a legal transition of ownership and property management, I said. As of this morning, all rights associated with this home fall under my direct control. My mother stood at the base of the stairs holding the rosary she only ever took out for holidays or arguments. Jason sat on the couch, elbows on knees, face pale. He didn't look at me. "You're evicting your own family," Dad growled. "This is our home." "No," I said evenly. "It's my investment. One you defaulted on and handed to me when I was 24 and still in uniform because the bank wouldn't trust your credit." That shut him up. I looked around the living room. The photo of me in boot camp, once framed above the mantel, was gone. In its place was a mirror I didn't recognize, one that reflected people who had erased me. I kept going. The illegal tenants have already been notified. If they're not out in 10 days, I'll file for trespassing. Any damage or interference with this process will result in criminal charges. Mom's voice cracked. "But where will we go?" I met her eyes without flinching. "I don't know, Mom. Maybe not home for Christmas." She covered her mouth and turned away. Jason stood up, maybe to speak, maybe to apologize, but I raised a hand. "I don't need words. I needed them 10 years ago. Now I need boundaries." Behind me, the locksmith changed the code on the front door. I didn't look back. They didn't fight it. No last-minute calls, no angry letters, no dramatic pleas, just silence. The kind that comes not from peace, but from people finally realizing you weren't bluffing. January 31st came and went, and by the morning of February 1st, the house at 12 Windmere Lane was empty. I arrived just after sunrise, a fresh key in hand. The snow had started to melt, revealing patches of dead grass beneath. 3 cars had once filled the driveway. Now only mine. I stepped inside and let the door close behind me. There was no note, no apology, no trace of goodbye. Only stillness. I walked through each room slowly. The living room was bare, except for a long scratch across the hardwood right where the coffee table used to sit, the one I bought with my first deployment check, and they insisted had always been theirs. In Jason's old room, I found a duffel bag tag from some ski trip I was never invited to. The kind of thing that wouldn't matter to most people, but to me, it was a reminder that even when I was alive, I had been a ghost in my own family. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't feel anything, but because I had already felt it all over years in silence, in every ignored message and every moment I showed up just to be invisible. In the kitchen, I opened the back door and let the wind in. It was cold, sharp, honest, the kind of air that doesn't pretend. I stood there for a while, letting it move through the hallways like a reset. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about restoring something I didn't even know I'd lost: my dignity, my name, my place. I wasn't the daughter they could ignore anymore. I was the woman who had survived them, and now I was home. Not because they welcomed me, but because I no longer needed their permission to belong. I didn't move into the house. I could have. Legally, emotionally, even symbolically. But I didn't want to live in a place where I had once been erased. I didn't want to eat at a table where no one had ever waited for me to sit down. Instead, I chose something else. I turned the house into transitional housing for female veterans, women like me, who came back from service only to find there was no door open, no couch to sleep on, no one who understood how hard it is to return to silence after chaos. We called it the Monroe House, not for legacy, but for reclamation, a name I'd buried years ago behind military rank and family shame. Now it meant something different. Now it meant survival. Reggie helped with the renovations. We didn't change the bones of the place, just the feeling. We painted the walls warmer, fixed the basement leak, pulled out the mold, tore down what needed tearing down. In the old living room, we added a bookshelf filled with paperbacks from women who wrote about war, about silence, about choosing yourself when no one else will. A local newspaper ran the story a few months later. Veteran reclaims family, home to house, others like her. The headline felt neat, easy, like the pain had a clean resolution. Reporters called. One asked if I had anything to say to the people who left me behind. I said no, because it wasn't about them anymore. It was never really about revenge. It was about healing in a place that once hurt, about proving to myself more than anyone that I didn't need a family's permission to take up space. Now, every Christmas I light a single candle on the front porch. No tree, no wreath. Just a flame in the dark. It's not for them. It's not even for me now. It's for the girl who once stood in that driveway bag and hand boots, still dusty from somewhere far away, waiting for someone to say, "We're glad you're home." No one said it then. So now I light the candle for her, and make sure no woman like her ever stands outside that door again. My name is Claire. I was 26, and I had exactly one thing that was mine. It wasn't much. Just a black laptop with a missing key, a cracked touchpad, and a buzzing fan that sounded like it was sighing in pain. But inside were 5 months of sleepless nights, 73 cited sources, and the only version of my master's thesis. I lived in a basement unit with no windows and too much damp. Paid my rent working 2 part-time jobs. I didn't have backup drives. I didn't have cloud subscriptions. I had flash drives and hope and coffee. Too much coffee. That afternoon, the sun hit the floor in a way I still remember. Not because it was beautiful, because it was the last normal thing I saw before everything cracked. My younger brother Brandon burst into the room. He was 21, tall, confident, the kind of boy our parents called a handful with a smile. He had their full attention from the moment he was born, and he knew it. "Can you drive me to the party tonight?" he asked, already irritated. I told him I couldn't. I had a submission deadline. 1 week left. He rolled his eyes. "You always think you're better than everyone because you're in school," he muttered. I didn't answer. I thought silence would end it. It didn't. Less than 5 minutes later, I heard the sound. Not a thud, not a crash, a shatter. I ran into the living room and saw it. My laptop. Face down screen bent backward like a broken wrist. Keys scattered, battery compartment cracked open. Brandon stood over it. Arms crossed, unapologetic. "Oops," he said, smirking. It slipped. My knees buckled. I hit the floor, hands shaking, eyes locked on the pieces of what had been my future. The thesis, the drafts, the outlines. Gone. I turned to our parents, Carol and Richard. Not crying, not shouting, just asking. "Mom? Dad?" Carol laughed, actually laughed. "It's just a computer, Claire. You're being dramatic." Richard shook his head like I was the one who'd overreacted. "You should have printed it out. That's what we used to do. No one came to kneel beside me. No one asked if I was okay." Brandon shrugged. "Maybe don't act like you're the only one who matters next time." I got up slowly. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I walked back to my room and closed the door. Sat in the dark, heart pounding, rage blooming, quiet, steady, alive. That was the day I stopped expecting rescue. That was the day I began remembering everything. I didn't talk to anyone for the next 2 days. Not my parents, not Brandon, not even my professor, though I knew I had to. I slept in the library during off hours. Not really sleep, just lay there curled up on a stiff couch between sociology shelves, listening to the night janitor vacuuming the echoes out of the room. That week, I pawned my guitar for $70, skipped lunch and breakfast, took overnight shifts in the campus print room just so I could use a spare computer without being asked questions. I started over, not out of inspiration, out of necessity. I copied what I remembered from my thesis outline onto a fresh Google Doc. Page 1. Again. And while I typed, I started collecting things. Receipts. Not emotional ones. Literal ones. I knew Brandon had been charging things on our parents' credit card. I just didn't know how much, so I looked. I asked questions without asking. I noted dates. A tire shop invoice. A club cover charge. A liquor store in a town he didn't live in. There was also the broken window he blamed on the neighbor's kid. Funny how the timeline matched his road trip story. Funnier how the neighbor was out of town that weekend. But I didn't confront anyone, not yet. I saved screenshots, email alerts, names of stores. I created folders on USBs labeled things like notes grad paper just in case someone looked. No one did. By the 3rd week, I had rewritten 60% of my thesis. Not perfect, but getting there. I lived on vending machine soup and small private fury. Brandon, meanwhile, posted party photos and gym selfies. My parents still asked if he wanted a new phone plan. No one asked if I had a working computer. Once I overheard Carol on the phone with her sister. She laughed and said Claire's just being intense again. You know how she gets. It didn't sting the way it used to. It just clarified. They'd never seen me as someone in crisis, only someone who refused to relax, so I stopped asking. Not for help, not for fairness. I focused on rebuilding the one thing I could control my work, and the rest I stored it. Quietly. Like a ledger. Because sometimes the only way to survive being erased is to keep the receipts. I submitted my thesis on a Monday. It wasn't the version I had imagined, but it was mine. Every sentence rebuilt, every reference refound. I didn't tell my family. I didn't expect congratulations. That same day, I sent a separate email, not to my advisor, to the university's Office of Academic Integrity. Inside was a link, a screenshot, and a short message. Student Brandon Taylor appears to have submitted this article as original work. Source material was published online 6 months prior. I didn't need to say more. I had the evidence. Word-for-word plagiarism from an obscure blog he thought no one would find. He'd used it for a history assignment. He got an A. My parents had taken him out to dinner for finally taking things seriously. They never asked what I was eating that night. I didn't gloat. I didn't warn him. I just hit send. Back at home, it was as if nothing had changed. Brandon strutted around the house like he was untouchable. He joked. He flexed. He teased me under his breath. Carol beamed when he said he might finally crack a B+ average this term. Richard nodded like that was a breakthrough. They bought him a new stereo system for the car he nearly crashed last month. Meanwhile, I taped together my cracked phone charger with electrical tape and rationed my printer credits. Sometimes I'd hear them planning a barbecue. We should do something nice. Brandon's been trying what I wasn't invited, again. But I didn't need to be at the table, because this time I was already in the room they didn't know existed. The day after submitting my thesis, I received a short reply from the academic office. They were opening a case. Quietly. They thanked me for bringing this to our attention. That's all I wanted. Not revenge. Just acknowledgement. I knew it wouldn't be immediate. These things never are. But it had begun. One small, silent fracture in the shiny wall around their golden sun. He didn't even hear it crack. A week after the barbecue I wasn't invited to, I got an email from an editor at a local magazine. Hi, Claire. Loved your article. Would you be open to expanding on it for a follow-up piece? I stared at the message for a full minute. I hadn't submitted anything. I hadn't written anything for them, but apparently someone had. The editor attached a PDF. Title: The Myth of Moral Merit, Why Grades Don't Measure Growth by Claire Taylor. Except I hadn't written a single word. Brandon had. Or more accurately, Brandon had copied and pasted someone else's article from an academic blog, slapped my name on it, and submitted it to a magazine, probably for attention or credit, or maybe just curiosity to see if it would work. It had, until now. I replied to the editor. Calm, professional. I explained that I had not submitted that work and had not given anyone permission to use my name. She apologized, thanked me, said she'd flag it internally. But it didn't stop there. I started checking carefully if anything else had my name on it, and that's when I found it. A $2,500 student line of credit. Approved 3 months ago. Opened under my name. My social security number. My email just slightly misspelled. A signature that looked almost like mine. It wasn't just identity theft. It was fraud. He hadn't just broken my laptop. He'd borrowed my name. I went cold, then methodical. I gathered every receipt I had, the new tires he charged on our parents' card, the digital trail of the fake article, the forged application form, the charges linked to the fraudulent credit line. Then I walked into the student legal clinic with everything printed in a folder I labeled documentation. The student attorney didn't ask, "Are you sure?" She said, "Let's get started." The bank opened an investigation. Brandon was notified. So were my parents. Carol called first. "I'm sure it's just a mix-up," she said, voice tight. "You don't want to ruin his future over this." Then Richard. "Let's handle this privately as a family." They both said the same thing in different ways. Let it go. I didn't. The court date was scheduled for early spring. Brandon tried to claim stress. My parents tried to frame me as overreacting or keeping secrets as if I had betrayed them by protecting myself. But I didn't fight back. I just showed up with screenshots, emails, bank records, and my student attorney by my side. I didn't wear anything dramatic, just a navy dress with a steady zipper and clean shoes. When the judge asked me what I wanted, I didn't say jail time. I said restitution, the cost of the laptop, the recovery process, the credit damage, $75,000. He agreed. Brandon's accounts were frozen. Carol cried in the hallway. Richard said nothing. They offered to settle it quietly. They said I was the favorite now. I didn't answer. When I walked past Brandon, he didn't meet my eyes. I wasn't angry. I was done. A month after the hearing, I received an invitation. My thesis had been selected for a National Research Award. There would be a conference in Chicago, full travel coverage, a keynote panel, an audience of professors, professionals, and people I had once imagined being but never thought I'd stand among. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Brandon. I packed my one good blazer, a pair of flats that didn't pinch, and boarded the plane. The night before I presented, I sat alone in the hotel room eating a microwaved soup cup from the vending machine. I stared at the little blinking light on the minibar fridge and realized I wasn't nervous. I had already stood in a courtroom with my name on the line. A lecture hall didn't scare me anymore. The next morning, I spoke for 22 minutes about the resilience of under-resourced students, about academic credibility in digital age transitions, about rebuilding trust in institutional systems when those systems fail you first. They clapped, not because they knew me, but because they heard me. For the first time, I didn't have to explain why I cared. They understood. 2 days later, I was back home when I received another email, this one from a woman named Olivia. She introduced herself as a senior editor at a rising investigative outlet. She was working on a feature about academic fraud tied to several universities. Brandon's name had surfaced again. Apparently, there were others, more than one essay resold, more than one forged letter. She had read the court transcript. I'd love to hear your side of the story, she wrote. Not for drama, for record. I hesitated, then remembered something silence hadn't protected me. It had protected them. So I agreed. I didn't smear them. I didn't embellish. I told the truth. How a girl's academic future was shattered in her own home. How her brother smiled while doing it. How her parents defended him while watching her drown. How they only begged when the court got involved. The article was published 3 weeks later. Title, Family Loyalty or Family Scapegoat. Within days, professors from undergrad reached out. A neighbor from childhood messaged, "We always thought you had something special. We just didn't know how much they tried to bury it. Even my high school English teacher sent a note. I'm not surprised." Just proud. Carol and Richard didn't message. But I heard from someone else. The magazine that had printed the plagiarized article under my name, they added a retraction. With a footnote. The real Claire Taylor has since gone on to receive national recognition in graduate research. That was enough. Life moved forward quietly. I didn't go back to that house. I didn't block their numbers either. I just never answered. I moved cities, took a job at a think tank focused on education policy. It was the kind of place where people said things like, "We read your work," and meant it. I had a name now, not famous, just respected. And that was all I ever wanted. 6 months after the article went viral, our organization acquired a historic property just outside my hometown. A sprawling estate once used for corporate retreats, now set to become a research and innovation center. It wasn't planned. It was just available, quiet, open. I knew the address before I saw the paperwork. My family had used it every summer for reunions, photos on the lawn, long tables under string lights, the kind of thing Carol used to post with captions like, "Grateful for what matters most, family." I didn't buy the estate. The think tank did. But when the rental requests came in, I was the one managing approvals. One day, an email arrived in the general inbox. Request, Taylor Family Annual Reunion, July 9-11. Same dates. Same name. I didn't reply. I just forwarded it to my assistant with a short note, "Kindly send the updated rental policy. All bookings subject to owner approval." Clients with unresolved litigation or documented history of familial abuse will be declined. There was no follow-up until a week before the retreat. I was on site helping the team prep signage and welcome packets when I saw the car. Silver. Familiar. It pulled up slowly, almost like it didn't want to be seen. Then the doors opened. Carol stepped out first. She looked older than I remembered, not aged, dimmed. Richard followed, less certain than usual. They didn't recognize me at first. I was in a fitted white suit, walking beside the program director, clipboard in hand. No backpack, no broken charger, no duct tape. I didn't stop walking. But they did. Claire Carroll asked, voice catching. I turned. She looked ready to say something. Maybe sorry, maybe something else. But I raised a hand. You knew it was me, I said. You just didn't think I'd ever own anything. They blinked. Tried to explain, tried to reframe. We didn't mean to shut you out, Carol said. We were just scared. You were turning the world against Brandon. I smiled small. No, he did that all by himself. I just stopped protecting him. They asked gently if we might still use the space. I pointed toward the road. There's a lovely public park 2 towns over. You'll find it less intimidating. And I walked away. I didn't hear from them for a while after that day. No calls, no letters, not even the vague hope you're well messages Carol used to send in group threads before holiday photos. Just silence. And silence, I've learned, is not always empty. Sometimes it echoes. Brandon tried once. A text. You didn't have to ruin my future. I didn't reply, because I hadn't ruined anything. I had just let the truth breathe. That spring we held our first retreat at the estate. It was clean, light-filled. Students and researchers sat on the same lawn my family used to take pictures on. Someone brought a guitar. Someone else started a conversation circle under the old oak. It didn't look like a confrontation. It looked like restoration. On the second evening just after dusk, I walked the perimeter with the program director checking the motion lights. We paused by the west gate. There was a faint rustle. A figure stood at the edge of the property. Carol, alone. She wasn't crying. She wasn't yelling. She was holding something, a photo, from one of the old reunions. I recognized the dress I wore that year. I was 12, smiling but not looking at the camera, looking at something else, something off frame. She noticed me watching. I thought I'd just see it one more time, she said softly. I didn't answer. She stepped closer to the line between gravel and private grass, but she didn't cross it. I don't know how it got this far, she added. I did, but I didn't say it. She held the photo out toward me, not as an offering, more like a question. You were always the strong one, she said. I looked at her, and for a moment I remembered being 12, being proud of a science fair project, holding it up for her to see, waiting, just a second too long. She'd looked at Brandon instead, so I nodded once. Not forgiveness, just recognition. Then I turned, walked back toward the porch, and left her there on the other side of a line she drew long ago. No door slammed, no name called, no final outburst, just distance, clear, calm, irrevocable. That was the last time I saw her, and it was enough, because in the end I wasn't the bitter one. I wasn't the loud one. I wasn't even the forgotten one. I was the one who remembered, who rebuilt, who walked back holding the keys they never thought I'd carry, and didn't hand them over. I didn't return to be applauded. I didn't speak up to be believed. I did it because silence had protected the wrong people for too long. And sometimes telling the truth just once is how you learn to breathe again. This story isn't about revenge. It's about clarity, about standing at the edge of something that used to own you and realizing you've outgrown it. If you've ever stood in that silence, if you've ever been the one who kept the peace while everything inside you broke, you don't have to explain. Just know I see you. If you've ever waited for someone to notice you were missing, and they never did leave a dot,